1980s, local officials estimated that charcoal and fuel wood met more than 90% of Uganda's total energy requirements. These two materials produce 75% of the nation's commercial energy. Petroleum products, 21%. Electricity provided only 3% of commercial energy. By the late 1980s, the government sought alternative energy sources to reduce the nation's reliance on forest resources for fuel wood. Today, the Uganda's National Environment Management Authority estimates that Uganda's total forest loss will occur in 2050 if the current rate of destruction of forest resources for production of food, settlement and commercial production of sugar is not reversed. The demand for new connections to electricity generated at the various power stations in Uganda has largely increased in rural areas. At the same time, more than 80% of fuel wood consumption is still in the home, primarily for cooking. To reduce this dependence on biomass energy, the government attempted to promote the manufacture and use of more efficient fuel stoves. This modest effort was difficult and expensive to implement on a nationwide basis, in part because cooking methods were established by long-standing traditions and associated costs. In this edition of Environment Talk, we analyze the path that the energy sector has taken since the 1980s, in contrast with what is going on in Kenya. Stay tuned. My name is Peter Labeja. Welcome back. By 2013, the population of Uganda was estimated to be 34 million people, and the total energy demand stood at 487 megawatts, against the total supply of 580 megawatts. This demand is growing at 10% per annum, against the annual population growth rate of 3.4%. Researchers have put the projected peak demand by 2020 at 1,219 megawatts, almost 3 times the current generation capacity. Parliament has responded decisively by approving loans for investment in the energy sector. Among the many is a recent loan credit of $135 million from France for the development of the energy sector through the construction of transmission lines and enhancement of rural electrification projects.
During the phase of the armed struggle, we moved at a much faster pace. We had a lot of problems: lack of arms, lack of food, lack of drugs, lack of clothes, etc. But we solved those problems systematically until we won victory in 1986. Infrastructure was tackled with the increase of electricity generation from 60 megawatts in 1986 to 380 megawatts, and the repairing of the major roads and so on and so forth. Then we have done the following projects of taking the electricity: Sironko, Nakapelpilit, Amdat. That was funded all by ourselves. Therefore, today, we are emerging from the strategic mistakes imposed on us by external forces, delaying the equipping of the army and the delaying of the development of electricity. So these mistakes, 2 big mistakes, we are now out of them.
In 2012, the World Bank committed $336 million in Uganda and increased the figure in 2013 to $265 million. The commitment is part of a 6-year development support to the energy sector, according to Makta Diop, the World Bank Group Vice President for Africa, while touring Bujagali Power Station in Jinja in 2012.
What are the areas that we would like to indicate that the government would like to focus on? One is increasing the productive base of the country, which means much more infrastructure which helps the competitiveness of Uganda. Uganda has a lot of potential. You have a lot of water. You have, the minister was telling me that the potential for hydro in this country is 2 gigawatt, 2,000 megawatt. How to harness that potential? Secondly, how to build infrastructure so that the cost of logistics are reduced in Uganda. As you know, Uganda is a landlocked country, so logistics is central to the growth of the country.
report by the Committee of Parliament on National Economy says the country is in dire need of electricity, and that although government has prioritized the implementation of electricity generation, most of the projects are moving at a slow pace due to the inadequate funds. In their reports presented to Parliament by the committee chairperson Stephen Mukitale Birawa, the committee recommended immediate funding to the Ministry of Energy and the Uganda Electricity Transmission Company Limited to accelerate the development process of the projects to prevent government missing its intended target of electricity for all by 2035.
And in the next couple of years, there is another $200 million that we put in the energy sector, either through rural electrification or other type of intervention. But what I think is most important is that not only is the money that we bring in directly to support sector like energy, road and others, and I can give you all the details of our portfolio, but the convening power and the ability to bring the private sector. Because to be able to realize this ambition program that you have identified, it will require money from various sources. The government is already putting a significant part of its resources in infrastructure. We have asked the World Bank to redirect our portfolio towards infrastructure, and we are doing that, and agriculture as well. But also, centrally, we need to have the private sector coming in, because this is where we can really, by mobilizing this true source of funding, accelerate the process. And in that context, I think that things like accelerating the PPP legal framework and laws will help us really moving that direction faster than what we are doing right now.
According to a new report from the Population Reference Bureau, a Washington, D.C.-based research and advocacy group, Uganda's current population of 34 million is projected to explode to 130 million people by 2050. This is nearly a 5-fold increase. The lack of a national commitment to family planning services is to blame for the country's extraordinary population growth. Analysts say this is dangerous, but President Yoweri Museveni has described it as a great resource, thanks to recent discovery of 3.5 billion barrels of commercial oil in the small nation. So far, the president has named the list of priorities to benefit from the oil proceeds to enhance trade and regional integration by 2025.
Oil is a finite resource which will dry out one day. It must be used to create durable capacity. It should be used for developing cheap electricity from hydro sources, solar sources, wind sources, the biomass, and nuclear energy in their order of urgency and affordability. First to be developed will be all the hydro sites along the Nile and its tributaries. This should give us about 4,000 megawatts. That's exactly what the parliament had meant.
However, fear is ripe among scholars as to whether we will see a good fraction of the proceeds going to the development of the energy sector in particular. Some say the president's vision is too far-fetched.
Because all he talked about was really to convince Parliament that there was need for them to enact that law. But which law had already been enacted?
Petroleum is a strategic resource, and the government is committed to developing it and exploiting it in the most transparent and accountable manner for benefit of all Ugandans and for the generations to come. And he was able to take members through the plans that the government has in how to develop this resource, and of course calling on our partners.
The large population has triggered the wind of panic to sweep through the country, and how the government will meet the growing energy demand is dominating debates across the political divide.
Nuclear energy is a quick source of energy, but it is the most expensive nuclear energy. To set up a nuclear plant is so expensive that no donor or funder can fund nuclear energy installation except a country. Once you put a nuclear plant, the lifespan runs between 30 to 50 years. Once it reaches 50 years, you have to decommission that plant. Its lifespan ends. The biggest problem is how to deal with the nuclear waste.
In response, government launched the construction of 600 megawatt power plant at Masishon Falls on the Nile River. The project was delayed by environmentalists and opposition politicians who protested its location at the heart of a rich national park. The new location is now 2 kilometers upstream, away from the epicenter of Masishon Falls National Park. Government officials hope the new station will meet Uganda's electricity power needs up to the year 2020 if completed on schedule. Climate change experts are campaigning for mitigation and adaptations in the midst of increased severe weather conditions. And if their predictions are anything to go by, frequent severe weather conditions such as droughts and flood will greatly affect the generation of electricity from hydro sources. Therefore, exploiting climate change resilient alternatives such as geothermal sources, solar energy, nuclear and biogas are cropping up in East Africa. Kenya is one country that has hugely invested in geothermal and solar power. I was in Kenya in 2012 and I was able to visit Olkaria 2 geothermal power station in the Great Eastern Rift Valley. While there, I spoke with a senior engineer at the station. I began by asking this engineer, who refused to be identified, to explain for me the process of generating electricity from a geothermal source.
Okay, the whole process starts underground, and we have the heat energy that is naturally underground. That is as a result of the hot magma that we have underground. Magma is just hot molten rocks, because these are rocks which have melted due to the presence of high temperature. Most of the rocks which are very underground, they are in molten form. They are very good in storing the underground heat, the one that now we are utilizing in geothermal. And this hot magma is the one that heats the underground water. Underground water boils and becomes the steam. Then wells are drilled into the ground to mine steam, hot water and gases. After separation of the hot water, the steam is led to the turbines that turns the generators to produce electricity.
This power plant generates 105 megawatts of electricity, just 1 megawatt below the amount of electricity produced at Kenya's largest hydroelectricity dam. The technician says it is reliable and can meet the entire Nairobi energy needs for years.
Very much reliable because, for one, if you compare the geothermal with the other sources of energy, you'll find that geothermal is very much reliable because, one, it does not suffer from the climatic conditions or even the weather conditions like the ones the hydropower stations suffer. So whenever we have the droughts, the hydropower stations, they suffer a lot due to the reduced water levels in the rivers. But with the geothermal, the production levels remains the same, simply because the water that we are using is it's not coming from the mountains or from the rivers, but it is stored underground, and we can be able to use that for very many years. And then there is also another advantage, because after we use the steam, we return it back to the ground.
Another intervention in the energy sector is the development of biogas technology that uses human excretion and livestock droppings to produce gas, which is used for both cooking and lighting. The byproduct of the biogas system is rich in manure for crop production. Residents in Kiambu County in central Kenya are already using this technology. Noah Lusaka, the program manager of the Arid Land Information Network, says investing in these technologies help in cutting down carbon emission, the gas behind climate change, and hence conserving the environment.
Yeah, because of the changes in our climate, which is basically affected by the greenhouse gases, most notorious being carbon dioxide released to the atmosphere. There's need to change to alternative renewable energies. By renewable energy, we say these are energies which are around. They don't interfere like with the atmosphere, but they are also readily available. A technique like using biogas is actually renewable as long as you keep your livestock. They'll keep excreting, they'll eat. It's a recycling cycle.
Kenya Electricity Generation Company, KenGen, has built 2 plants to exploit the Olkaria geothermal resource. Olkaria 1 generating 45 megawatts and Olkaria 2 62 megawatts, with a third private plant, Olkaria 3 48 megawatts. Kenya currently has 200 megawatts of installed geothermal capacity. By 2030, Kenya aims to have 5,530 megawatts of geothermal power, or 26% of total capacity. This will make Kenya's largest source of electricity clean energy by 2030. To prepare the energy sector of Kenya for the worst of times, Government of Kenya has invested hugely in the geothermal energy, according to Noah Lusaka, the program coordinator of ALIN, Arid Land Information Network in Africa.
The governments are also now investing in more mega projects. Like in Kenya here, we have invested a lot in the geothermal production because we have areas that have potential for production of this, and the government has mapped the whole country and they know where they can tap this. Already at Olkaria, there's production of electricity that is fed to the national grid and just to avail electricity to other Kenyans in different parts.
Lusaka says geothermal power is very cost effective in the Great Rift Valley of Kenya. Kenya was the first African country to build geothermal energy sources. In addition, Kenya has identified 9 sites to build solar power plants that could provide more than half the country's electricity by 2016. Construction of the plants, expected to cost $1.2 billion, an estimated 73 million euros, is set to begin this year, and initial design stages are almost complete. The partnership between government and private companies will see the state contributing about 50% of the costs. Kenya ranks 22nd in Africa for the amount of electricity it generates and 46th in the world in the generation of solar energy. But it could rank 3rd for solar in the next 4 years, according to figures from the Energy Regulatory Commission, a government agency. The country is also planning the construction of what will be sub-Saharan Africa's largest wind farm near Lake Turkana, which is set to be operational by 2015. If other African countries are financially supported to invest heavily in wind power, geothermal power, solar energy, energy-efficient cook stoves and biogas, the diversified sources of energy will help the continent address the problem of unreliable electricity and poverty, while helping to tackle climate change at the global level. And that is it for this edition of The Environment. And don't forget to tune in again next week for yet another edition. Stay tuned for more interesting programs. For comments and questions regarding this program, please write to the producer, Peter Labeja, at gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening.